Everybody, this is me again, Pat Windrow, sitting at the Cable Easel with a program which is devoted to painting and drawing from life. And when I do a landscape, the best that you can do about painting from life is to go out and shoot a scene with a video camera, bring it back here and project it onto the monitor, and that's what I work from. So this program is going to present a scene from Port Jefferson Harbor, which is quite absolutely wonderful on one of those sought-after winter days when the sky is clear and the sun is brilliant and the wind is blowing and telling you what direction it's coming from. And this particular scene, as you may see on the monitor, is foretelling a northeast wind, because this scene is looking west towards, well, northwest towards the Connecticut shoreline through Port Jefferson Harbor. And when the wind is northeast, blowing that flag like that, you know that there's something brewing, something is coming. So not only is this going to be instructive for everyone to see, but it's also going to be another one of my demonstrations of palette knife painting. Everybody seems to love the texture of palette knife. And so even though I do a palette knife painting, I'm going to lay it out and give it a sketch beforehand. You do not begin applying paint to a canvas without a plan. And so unlike many programs that one sees whereby the sky is put on with an enormous brush and then after that something happens and a landscape presumably is going to get born, I like to plan it and to draw it. And so with this reference material right here in front of me, and I always put a border around my canvas so that I can have ways of carrying it wet to its destination, or simply removing it from the easel. So I'm going to begin by with a brush full of what I call colored turpentine. I'm going to lay out in the most simple way where these particular objects are. And the little fishing shack over to the left of this composition, you have to have some idea of how to draw these things. So let me just show you how I go about it in very simple lines. There is a question of perspective here. There is also a question of being able to place this properly in proportion to the rest of it, because the next thing you know, you have gone and made things too small, too far down on the canvas. So always be prepared to put these things down in a plan. Now, if this is in perspective, then the pilings in the water are going to have to be in perspective also, because they're coming towards you. And here is the way you would plan for such a thing, just counting, of course, that you've also got some diagonals in there. And then we have that nice demonstration of what perspective is all about. This piling in the water, which is equally as tall as the ones around, is shorter because it seems to be, because it is farther away. And it's at about halfway mark of the shack. These are the identifying placements of these objects. Then the next one, which is a lower one, but it is farther away, and so you must remember the planes. And when these things are laid out this way, you almost can't fail to have the proper perspective. This one way off in the distance is at about this level with the house. I'm using my points of reference, and this is the way, and you've got to lay these out this way, otherwise your proportion gets completely all off. And I like to be able to talk about the way you lay these things out, because I'm afraid the business of just sitting down and painting immediately does not work. Here is the horizon line in the distance, which is the far beach area off Port Jefferson Harbor, known as Whitehall Beach, and you may, and here's that bird on top here, just in case, but I'm going to be painting over that. But I just want to show you how you lay this kind of thing out. All right, the ferry, the fishing boat on the side here, the horizon line is here, and you will find, in order to place the conning tower, or the top part of this boat, the cabin part of the boat, you would place it according to the line that you've made a reference to. These are things important to know where to place these objects. I find a lot of people are very perplexed about where to put these objects, and so this little lesson in planning and in drawing out what you're going to do is essential for a decent composition, also for a certain sense of accuracy in these realistic paintings. Now, even though I'm going to be painting in palette knife, you have to be faithful to the subject matter, and you have to be able to have it recognizable. All the texture in the world is not going to save a bad composition nor a bad perspective. So even though I'm going to be putting paint on very thick, I must have this plan decently set out. Let me see if I've got this set properly. Yes, I think this is probably right. And the monitor is difficult to see, but logically the other side of the boat is going to be a mirror image of this one, even though it's kind of lost in shadow. And this is the boat that is looking at head on. Here is the cord that takes it to tethers it to the dock. The dock, by the way, is Danford's Inn Dock in Port Jefferson, a really delicious place. It's not just delicious because it's a restaurant, but it's picturesque and quite beautiful. And it is right there where the ferry arrives coming over from Connecticut. So if you are ever down in that area, don't fail to go and see Danford's Dock, and well, you can eat there, and you can also watch the boats come in, you can watch the ferry come in, and the whole thing is exactly what you would expect a Long Island scene to be. All these wonderful reflections are going to come in later as the painting progresses. I'm just placing objects at this point. This is all that I'm expected to do. There is a superstructure on this boat with a sort of a circular effect here. This cross piece here, this is all radar equipment, which is by law you must have a radar equipment and all sorts of sensors if you take crowds out. So all of these things that make it look like miniature battleships are actually safety measures for the public. Here's the flag that I was talking about before, blowing in the breeze and telling you what direction the wind is playing, because if you know the direction, you can see by the placement of this horizon. If you know the area at all, and anybody who knows Port Jefferson will know immediately that this is looking towards Bridgeport. Now that's about as much layout as one needs. I'm going to be using a palette knife. I'm going to be using actually 3 palette knives right here. I've got 3 different sizes, and the wonderful thing about palette knife is that you really can't fail to have these colors remain really clean and sharp, because every time you finish using a color, you wipe it off and it becomes clean. A brush has problems because it has hairs, and the color tends to linger. The pigment tends to linger in the hairs of the brush. But with a palette knife, you've got the ability to get the colors absolutely crystal clear. So I'm going to start, and one of my techniques about working with a palette knife is that you do not rely upon streaks and smears in the color. I like to see the color completely mixed without any streaks in it, because there's nothing to me more irritating than seeing an accidental smear. I find that it's, unless it's calculated, it has no business being on the canvas. The clarity of the sky was brilliant at the top, in other words, up towards the higher part of the canvas, and it gradually became more and more pale as it reached the horizon. So I'm going to, and with a knife full of color, I'm going to run it across as simply as possible. And I think I'm using quick drying white, which is a product that Grumbacher puts out. It's to me essential for palette knife painting, because it dries quickly enough to be able to do what I call layered painting. And that's one of the things about this palette knife work that I find so intriguing, and I think that if anybody really ever experiments with it, they'll find themselves equally as interested in it as I am. I put the color on, I go right over what I drew, because I'm going to do an overlay. I'm going to lay over the conning tower and that radar equipment over on top of this background of sky, which is, and the reason that I use the quick drying paint is because by the time I get around to doing that, it will be just in the condition whereby I'll be able to work right over it and not pick up too much of the color. So I'm now going to graduate down towards a paler blue, which I believe has got a slight, very, very slight touch of mauve in it that I'm taking from this palette, and a little bit of burnt sienna, because the atmosphere in the wintertime does not remain as clear as it does in the summertime. There is, and let me show you this this palette knife. This palette full of color. It's extremely. There are huge blobs of color on it because one paints thick when you do palette knife work, and you have to have a lot of color at hand as you're working. I put too much purple in that, so I'm going to be reducing it and put a touch of ochre in it, because if you're going to be a realist, even though the technique might be a little bit loose and you are working with a lot of color and you're making it look what painters call painterly, you want it also to be also accurate. So it comes down to well, it needs a little bit more blue than that, I think. So I'm going to mix it up a little bit more. And if anybody who tries this can remember that I like to see the color completely mixed before you apply it, you'll find that that's how you get the crispness. Oh, that's too dark. All right, we'll have to start all over again and keep adding the white. I find that when you work with this, you will find that the mixing of the colors becomes more and more, you understand it much better. As you work with palette knife work, you can understand the application of color, and you can also go over it. It is a fail-safe technique whereby if you put too much of something on, you can either overlay it, and in some instances, some people feel that the more color you put on and the more pigment you get, the more interesting it is. I think that you can see by the detail of the camera that you see these great globs, and a lot of people find that extremely appealing. It's slightly impressionistic. It's also you're very aware of the fact that this is oil paint. There's no mistaking that it's a nice, thick, and heavy impasto technique. That is the word that is used. It's called impasto. It's Italian for plastered, and I shouldn't hesitate because I use the term all the time. I should know it very well. But here's a nice feeling about a sky which is blending rather interestingly, but it also has all of this nice texture to it. And there is not a cloud in the sky, therefore you don't put them in. Now, for the most part, this is very wintry so far, and I think it's going to remain wintry because the colors, even though the sun is brilliant, the colors are wintry colors. Now, off in the distance, I'm going to use some of this puddle of the sky, the color that I mixed for the sky, and off there in the distance is a sort of a very pale, beachy tone. I think it's probably much paler than that, and a little bit more ochre. It has to be seen, and the dark over at the distance there is a touch of green that comes from whatever shrubberies are growing over on that lonesome spit of land, which I think I mentioned to you before is called Whitehall Beach. But anybody who knows Port Jefferson Harbor knows Whitehall as one of the more intriguing places to go, because you can only get there by boat. There is no way to be able to drive there or to bicycle there. You can only get there by boat, and therefore there are very few people over there. And if you're looking for solitude and you happen to be lucky enough to have a boat, or rent a boat, you can rent a boat. They're available in rents in the area, and you can get over there by boat. And it's a wonderful, really unspoiled place. Unspoiled. It is spoiled somewhat. You go over there and there are beer cans and flotsam and jetsam and old paper bags and plastic and everything, and just as you'll find in just about every part of the world. But it's still a wonderful, wonderful area that if everybody were to go out there and decide to clean some of it up, it would be even more wonderful. You may have been, as I'm talking, I'm applying this color very thick, and looking at it very closely, you can see just about how thick it is. It's going on, and I do not rework it. I like to see that. I like to see this buildup of color. I went to a museum in Washington just recently, and saw some exhibits of some contemporary works, and the color on some of these contemporary things are absolutely. Well, they're so thick, they're so thickly applied that I cannot imagine how long they took to dry, but who cares? The result is there, and they're quite really wonderful. It was at the National Gallery of American Art. If anybody in the audience ever happens to be in Washington, the National Gallery of American Art is wonderful. It's got every possible wonderful style, technique, place, and artist that works in America and has worked in America. Everybody from Edward Hopper on to all the other wonderful Americans, old, new, and still alive, and some dead. But boy, are they really wonderful pieces of work. So I wouldn't hesitate a minute to recommend going to the National Gallery of American Art. Not many people really, it's not really that well known in the Washington tourist area, but it's definitely there at G and 7th Streets. And it's an opportunity. You should really take an opportunity and go and see it. So, as I was saying, the paint that is applied with some of these painters is so thick that you sort of are fascinated with the idea that this is allowed. First of all, a lot of people think that paint has to be very smoothly put on, and very carefully controlled. Actually, some of these more contemporary painters had a sense of color which is just staggering, but they also had tremendous abandon. Well, on that note of abandon, I'm going to break for just a moment, and I'll be right back. So don't go too far away. I've got to squeeze out some more color. I'll be back. Yes, here we are once again, continuing with this first part of my composition of a fishing boat in Port Jefferson Harbor. The tape was taken on a beautiful, clear winter day with a good swift breeze blowing, and as you can see when you see the monitor, you can see that we are actually live out there, and the color of the water was wonderful, and I'm working with a palette knife, as you may have picked up before the show began, or as the show began. I told you about my desire to show you once again the technique of palette knife painting, which is layered painting. I believe that when you get a nice close view of this, you'll see that this is putting color layer upon layer, meaning that you do the same thing as you work towards the foreground with your painting, just as you do with brush painting, but I'm putting it on much thicker than brush, and it gives a nice. Well, it gives an interesting texture to oil paints, which people are looking for many, many times. And it's also, there's a spontaneity about it, which is irreplaceable. You find yourself being able to just throw detail to the wind and still retain some of it in a different pattern. So here, as one can see, by the monitor, the water becomes darker as it approaches the foreground. A condition which I have always found extremely interesting and sort of inescapably mysterious. Down as it comes towards the foreground, it becomes progressively darker, and I'm applying the color in great sweeps. There is not much, the time has flown with this with this part one technique of putting this paint on. I don't know why paint goes on so quickly, but it seems that when you're having fun, that's when it becomes a problem. I find that I can use almost all the paint that I squeeze out in the application of this water, and I would like to emphasize that the accidents or the incidentals that happen with the application is what you're after with this technique. You will find that it becomes, if you select the color properly, you'll find that without too much what I might call fussy detail, you can get a great deal of understanding of what is happening out here with all these waves and the motion of the water. The motion of the water is something that one has to pay attention to, and at the same time, I don't like to dwell on it. I would like to have it as an impression. This is what you might call somewhat impressionistic, because the detail is not literal. It is an impression of what the detail is. So here I'm going to lay out this pale part, and it will all become a little bit clearer as time progresses, and you see how I overlay the pilings, for instance. But I must lay this color of the water on first so that I can get the pilings painted over them. The paint is drying as quickly as I want it to. It is very satisfying to be able to go over this and see the way in which one can pull color across. Now, if you'll look at if when you see the monitor, you see that the wavelets that cause the reflections are quite dark. I'm mixing that up, and I'm going to put a little bit of this Zec, which is the component of the quick drying white. It's a translucent thickening agent for the darker colors. Now, I think that without putting the pilings in, which I think I'd better put the pilings in, the distant piling in there before the show comes to an end, I'm going to be using some black, a touch of alizarin crimson, and a touch of this sienna tone, so that I can get this, and maybe a touch of this green, so that I can get the sort of weathered look, but not black. It appears to be black on the monitor, but it actually is not black. It's more a weathered look, and a touch of white is going to make it. It has to be smoky. It has to be as genuine and as faithful to the color as you can get. Which means that you just keep at it, and as you can see, I mix and mix and mix until I get it exactly the color that I want, and then I put it on. I'm going to put those pilings on with a rather free hand, run down right through the background color that I put on until it comes to an end somewhere in this pale water area. This is many pilings for the ferry boat, which is a huge vessel at this point. When I first moved to Port Jefferson a long time ago, to the Setauket area a long time ago, the ferry was a very small boat. It is now graduated into a rather substantial vessel run by a really nice bunch of people over there, and they allowed me to come and set up on their dock, and they allowed me to come in with a little crew of one to film this. Actually, I probably have to get a permission the next time I go out there to go actually out on the end of the dock, because insurance purposes make them a little bit nervous. Who knows what can happen out there? Well, here is that one piling, and as long as I'm at it, I'm going to put the other one in. And as you can and the birds sit on top of it. It's quite wonderful to see. And this is a delicious scene. You must go out there sometime and try and just sit and look at the harbor, and realize that there are still spots on this wonderful island that are still somewhat unspoiled. There is asphalt and things in the parking lot here, but when you look out into this vista, you probably can imagine that this is the way it was a very long time ago, with very little interruption, especially in the water level. So if we can keep things free of all this pollution, I think that to preserve areas like this is absolutely essential to everybody's well-being, and also to the well-being of the people who are going to come afterwards. These are the people that we have to really make sure that we're not the only ones who selfishly were able to enjoy this wonderful bunch of stuff, but it's for others who come later. And it is a really wonderful atmosphere out there. All right, the reflections in the water are the same color, or maybe a slightly paler than the objects that they are reflecting. So with an interpretive frame of mind, I'm going to give you the wiggles, as you might want to call them, of this agitated surface of water, because the wind was blowing, and as it comes toward you, those wiggles become further and further apart, but they do have a sense of being uneven because of the surface of the water being agitated. And here is hopefully a feeling of what these reflections look like. And when you step back, there is hope that this piling reflection is going to make some sense, and it doesn't go too far, but it does continue somewhat because of the brilliance of the day. If I put too many in, no, that's all right. And then the next one has the same kind of a nice little arrangement of its wiggly reflection lines coming down almost as far as the other, and they do wiggle. They do this because. Well, that's the way they do it. And that's one of the things that one wants to do. One wants to see these wonderful wiggles in the water. A little bit closer together as you're up towards the object. And here is the third one. We don't have too much time, but I am going to, and then when this dries a little bit, I'm going to run some of the pale watery blue over this paint as it has dried, to be able to give you even more a sense of the brilliance of the little waves that go on top, that are on top of the surface. I'm working my way down. One thing that you have to be absolutely sure is that you get these lines straight. There's nothing worse than seeing a reflection that goes off into some goofy angle, and it has no relationship to whatever it's reflecting. There is apparently a piece of pale metal around the bottom part of this piling that's being caught by the sun, and because it's being caught by the sun, it's also being reflected in the water. These are wonderful details that can only happen when you're there. You have to be there. And that's why working from life is the shtick that I'm carrying so heavily upon my conscience, to make sure that everybody understands just what it means to work from life. I think that I will probably just insinuate a gull. They are up on the tops of these things at all times, resting. And if you happen to have something in your pocket and you throw it in the water, you have yourself an enormous bunch of activity way out there on in the water. I'm going to just, as I progress towards the end of this portion, this is part one, as you may have guessed, and part two will follow. Hopefully the programming will be so that when you see part one, you'll be able to tune in very soon afterwards and see part two. The programming is of course not my department, and it's always a fond wish of mine that these programs that you see are going to be logically followed by the second one, and not have another one introduced in between. But many times that happens without being able to be helped. However, this is part one, coming almost to an end. The roof of this wonderful little fishing station on Danford's dock is just well, it's a very pale mixture of whatever I have on the palette plus a touch of black, and it looks like my time is over. There is a young man in the shadows making signals that I have to stop. Very well. I obey young men with signals in the shadows, and so please watch me the next time to get the final and exciting conclusion to this painting of Port Jefferson Harbor and an old fishing boat out there. If you got something out of it, well then it's a plus, and if you didn't, just watch the next time. Maybe we can catch up. Thanks again. This is Pat Windrow at the Cable Easel, wishing you good painting. Bye-bye.